The subscription economy for the average American. Subscription, strange choice of words, George. What do you mean? I'll tell you. And don't call me George. I'm going to explain this to you in three simple, fast, they're steps. Step number one, need to understand the story up until now. I've been trapped in this room with a whiteboard for years. I keep trying to call for some help, or at least some food. But as we know, there's no free lunch. Let's explore the current debt situation. Here we have the U.S. federal funds rate. As you can see, since the early 1980s, spike in rates caused by Paul Volcker, with each economic cycle, the maximum interest rate has gotten lower and lower. Over the same time period, wage growth has remained positive, but also relatively stagnant, especially in more recent years. But asset prices have risen by several multiples over the same time frame. A quintessential example of this can be seen in rent and real estate prices. Editor, throw up the chart. Editor? Editor? Oh, oh. Well, I guess they have been quiet for a long time. New editor, throw up the chart. Real estate folks and landlords rejoice. The Fed did it. Prices stayed high despite a recession. Fantastic news. As wages have been unable to keep pace with asset prices, consumers have supplemented any additional funding needed through debt, as Raoul Pal and others have described far more eloquently in their discussions with Jorge Gammon. I think he sells tequila or something. Yeah. For another take on how this is bad for the average Joe and Jane, let's go right to our pal, Gregory Manarino. You said it, Greg. Step number two, what the policy response to this situation will be. As explained in step one, household debt has been continuously increasing, permitted by low interest rates. In a credit-fueled economy, like ours, the market operates on credit cycles, fantastic explanation of which is described in the Ray Dalio vid, The Economic Machine Explained. Here's what I want to quickly highlight. Lowered interest rates feed expansions, with more borrowing being made possible and therefore more spending, allowing asset prices to be bid higher. Therefore, this side of the credit cycle is generally inflationary. When interest rates rise and whittle down people's disposable incomes, this cycle reverses, which is generally deflationary. Now, the Federal Reserve, market PayPal, JPal, is determined to keep inflation positive. In other words, anything to keep us on the expansionary side of this credit cycle. Now, let's look at the real economy. Here we have Jim, his friends call him Jim. Overly friendly Fred, loony, broody, foodie? No, Moody the millennial, and a token zoomer no one cares about. Each is doing their best to accumulate wealth, but with constantly maintained high asset prices, many are being priced out of the market, or must assume ever larger sums of debt to participate. Jim has his bonds, Fred has deposits, Mooney took their checks and put them into Robinhood buying stocks, and Zoomer has whatever money,
its currency,
is in their account. So we have bonds, deposits, stocks, and money back, held in the real economy. A definite BDSM situation has developed here. Debt burdens are high, and even if you can participate in these markets, bond yields don't beat inflation, stocks are at all-time highs, and interest on savings is laughable. Your D just fails to work for you the way it used to. Meanwhile, our plastered, incompetent, insolvent, selfish Uncle Sam is pissed. He has a financially distressed population and has to at least appear to have the ability to resolve these societal issues. Spending money into the real economy is his tool, and with an apparent transition from a Fed put to a government put on the market, this is essentially the only policy play. UBI, expanded healthcare, further subsidized education, infrastructure programs, debt forgiveness are all on the menu. Goldman Sachs CEO is even quoted as saying a revolution would occur without UBI. Unfortunately, The reality is that there isn't a good way to afford these programs. There's really three options: tax, borrow, and print. Last I checked, no one wants to see their taxes rise. And even if tax increases are only on the top income brackets, they wouldn't yield nearly enough capital, if any, for the government. And as other nations no longer want to buy our debt, that leaves one option. Right now, overly friendly Fred gets back from the local playground and reveals himself to be a big government lover. He says, "Come on, fake George, don't you understand? There's no other way to get people out of the debt hole that they're in. And the last year has proven that without a safety net, too many things in everyday life are now unaffordable." I can see why you'd say that, and stop calling me George. For numerous people who never owned a home or financial assets to take advantage of the market gains up till now, that message will likely be more than enough justification to support any government action. So now Uncle Sam has a mandate. He's full of piss and vinegar, obviously, and starts spending on these programs, paid for via debt monetization. Or for you more technical folks out there, the government spends, the Fed buys the treasuries, Pernigo Burr. The currency then goes into specific sectors of the economy: healthcare, education, job programs, with UBI and having the most widespread application. The expansion in the money supply used to pay for these services devalues the other currency units in circulation, leading to price inflation. And just to bring us full circle here, knowing that monetary inflation technically reduces the burden of existing debt, it's the QE, the devaluation, that's the key step in the Fed's efforts to bypass the deflationary half of the credit cycle. Step number 3, the good, the bad, and the ugly of this strategy. While the presented scenario in step 2 didn't seem overly positive, I'd want to point out that there are several other layers to the situation. In the previous steps, we iterated that the situation with stagnant incomes and high levels of private debt are limiting spending in the real economy. The idea of having UBI be a means of lowering levels of private debt while giving feelers more to the debt-free was discussed by economist Steve Keen in this excerpt from Bobo Macro.
We have caused a crisis by letting too much credit money get created, and that credit money predominantly financed asset bubbles rather than genuine investment, which would be the desirable usage of credit in the first place. And so we have to reverse that mistake. And the easy way to do it is for the government to give a per capita injection into household bank accounts, equivalent for every household. So Rupert Murdoch's household will get the same amount as my household, were I in America. Of course, far more beneficial to the poor than the rich. Then if you're in debt, you pay your debt down. If you're not in debt, you get a cash injection. That cash injection could be limited in such a way that it could only be used to buy corporate shares, where those new corporate shares, newly issued shares, where those newly issued shares must be used to pay down corporate debt. So it'd be a set of accounting operations that basically replaced a large amount of credit-backed money with fiat-backed money, and then eliminate the excessive level of private debt we've created. You can be able to get away with any level of government debt and any level of government spending if you're monetarily sovereign and you have a trade, or you have a trade surplus. Now, America is monetarily sovereign because it's the international currency.
But it doesn't have a trade surplus.
No, it's got a trade deficit, but it can finance it because people want American dollars.
Now, a key part of Keen's clip is that the nation can only spend in this fashion without dire consequences if they either have a trade surplus or the reserve currency, which we do have at the moment. So perhaps a limited budget-neutral form of this policy, which is paired with reductions in other spending, could be possible. Unfortunately, there are many other troll guys, as evidenced by the categories given back in step 2. These ones are the lobbyists and establishment forces that benefit from all these programs remaining in place. So we have the general over-administration and undergrad tuition troll, the housing oversight and real estate troll, renewable energy and everything explained as environmentally essential. Insurance for all things one needs every day. Anything healthcare, that's it. And the financial industry who finances it all. Pending acronym. I find it incredibly unlikely that a government corporate entity is going to suddenly want to see itself lose influence in all these areas of the economy, meaning any new spending will likely just be slapped on top of the current spending. This brings us to the bad. Even with the reserve currency, other countries, namely China, are taking notice of our spending habits and have begun to reduce their holdings of US debt. Also, the recent failure of the 7-year Treasury auction and spike in bond yields makes what was a quietly developing story a much louder one. It's clear that eventually the dollar will lose its monopoly on being the reserve currency, but aggressive fiscal policy and monetary policy could hasten this and spur inflation, unlike a perhaps cleaner move that avoids pouring currency into these previously existing programs. Whoa, time out there, George, Jorge, whatever. Don't you understand there's also plenty of deflationary fears right now? People in lockdowns, reduced spending, stock market's already sky high. All the things you've already said imply that a crash could also be likely. Yes, and I want to clarify that I don't think the path to inflation is going to be so absolutely clear cut. But I do agree with the thesis that deflation, or repeatedly referenced fears of deflation, will be the excuse to pursue measures that will put us on the path to rampant inflation. Which brings us to the ugly, and the reason for my title here. Even without a cataclysmic hyperinflationary scenario, which Big Short Michael Burry is predicting, and assuming the Fed succeeds in avoiding a Great Depression-style deflation, as Steve Keen deems possible, we're still at a point where either extreme deflation or inflation is going to squeeze everyday people to the point of desperation, such as selling what few assets they have left via deflation killing incomes or inflation raising living expenses. Yet oddly enough, this narrative seems to match a particular plan. The WEF, Santa Claus and the Wheel of Fortune, or maybe Agents of Fortune, and his friends are here with the Great Reset, with one of the creepier quotes of Future Life in one of their articles about life in 2030, quote, "I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes." I'd ask who owns those things, but that's beyond my pay grade. Besides sounding like an excerpt from Huxley's Brave New World, that quote makes me think the narrative will become that certain services, let's just throw out a word, essential, will be subsidized further. So the subscription, I'm implying, is a basket of services that will be promoted as what is fair or right for all people to have. And, for my last acronym, any major implied deflation or market uncertainty will be met with more government and central bank action, because they certainly have a fear of net deflation limiting equities and will be given any excuse to continue to fondle the market. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control governments and big central banks, check out these clips, there aren't any, and I'll see you, maybe, on the next episode. Probably not.